Okay, so welcome to this second workshop of the day for the leadership of the congregation. I want to share with you our agenda, I want to situate ourselves so that we understand that the work that we are taking on as we engage in the eighth principle, we understand at least some of the wider context. And I know some of you have done some self-education. Some of you are already on the Facebook page for the eighth principle project. If you're not and you're on Facebook, you might want to join that because it's very illuminating and there's a lot of networking that goes on there. But before we go to the eighth principle project, I want to make sure that I share some words and information from Widening the Circle of Concern, the report of the UUA Commission on Institutional Change. This came out in February of 2020, and a copy of the book was sent to every congregation. I know that at least our president and vice president and maybe others on the board have read it and were inspired by it. And it has many chapters in it, I'm going to see it, that deal with trends, theology, governance, congregations and communities, hospitality and inclusion, living our values in the world, right? The sent part of our gathered and sent, religious professionals, educating for liberation, innovations, and risk-taking. So these are the topic headings in the chapter table of contents. The information that I'm sharing with you today is primarily focused on congregational life. I wanted to make sure that you knew just a little bit from this report that is influencing and should influence our Unitarian Universalism in this and the next quarter of this century. So you can see some of the pieces that I've pulled out, which include that the culture of so many congregations is not keeping pace with the expectations of new generations for anti-oppression practices. Too often we can hear someone say, well, that's not how it was when, but we marched in the civil rights movement, and that's fabulous. But if we aren't marching when George Floyd is murdered, if we're not paying attention to changing not just language, but what that change in language means, Black Lives Matters, if we're not paying attention to the abolition movement, right? As we shift and change our ideas of what role the police play, then we are stuck in the past. And that apparently is one of the things that is true about UU congregations. And so the report says we need promising practices, and that includes, and there's a fair amount of attention to the concept of endorsing that it is a good thing to allow caucusing for folks with with marginalized identities to be able to connect with each other and create safe enough space in wider congregations that tend to be predominantly white or predominantly heterosexual. And that if our identity is in the more dominant identity, that we can support that and also use our identities as places to caucus in accountable relationship with those folks who are marginalized. The report also calls us to use our covenantal understanding of our responsibilities to each other to guide us, and to use covenant rather than comfort or convenience as what guides us in the work that we do, especially around anti-racism. Because frankly, friends, and you all know this, I know all of you know this, anti-racism work is uncomfortable. And so if we were to follow what's comfortable, we will stay stuck. We will even go backwards. So covenant can draw us forward and give us the strength we need, the courage we need to do hard things. So one of those headers from the table of contents was trends. And so I'm going to ask you two questions. This is where the polls feature comes in, that were asked by the survey that the Commission on Institutional Change put out. So please have a little bit of patience with me as I figure out how to access the polls. So here is a question that was asked out in the wider Unitarian Universalist universe. And so we're going to answer it about our congregation. You answer it as best as you can from your point of view. Okay. So I just put a poll. I hope all of you can see it. Yes? Okay. Has our congregation, our community, experienced an incident of tension around race or other forms of oppression? And everyone's answered, so I'm going to go ahead and end the. Oh, wait, not everybody's answered. Okay, you got 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So here's, can you see the response of the poll? No, share results. Share results. That's what I had to do. Can you see it now? Okay. So what I am seeing is that a quarter of us said yes, there has been an incident of tension around race or other forms of oppression. And that same amount has said no. And that nearly half of us, 45% of us, had said, I actually don't know. Okay. So that's true for us. Here's what the wider Unitarian Universalist survey showed. Yes, half, no, a fifth, and between a fifth and a quarter saying, I don't know. Okay, so just interesting for us to, we're a very small sample. Our N is probably definitely not scientifically valid, but it is helpful information for us to know. I hope that we get to sit. I'm going to write it down because I don't know that this will save. Yes. No. I don't know. 5, 3, 3. Okay, great. Let's move to the next one, the next question. Okay. Does the justice work of our congregation incorporate learning around anti-oppression or multicultural work? And let me see. Poll. Stop sharing. Let's see if how do I get poll ended? Untitled poll, I see. Here we come to the second one. Yes, lunch. If you can answer that question for TUS, does the justice work of our congregation incorporate learning around anti-oppression or multicultural work? Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think we are done. We have 11 people. So I'm going to share the results. So 90% of us feel that the justice work of our congregation incorporates learning around anti-oppression and multicultural work, and 10%, 9% say, I don't know. What about, how does that compare with what's happening in the wider Unitarian Universalism? 2/3 say yes, 18% say no, and 14% say I don't know. So this is a little bit more similar than the other one. Okay. I will say that if we think about the first question, has something happened that is racially tense in our congregation? During the 5-ish years that I have served you, I will say yes. Yes. And just so you know, it's with us. Sometimes we can think that sometimes I think white people can think that we are outside of racism, but as you use, but we are not. So another piece of the wider context that I want to share with you is what's called the Article 2 Commission, right? So I just talked to you about the Commission on Institutional Change, which provided the report Widening the Circle of Concern. This is different. This also has the word commission in it, but it's the Article 2 Commission. And it's called that because Article 2 of the bylaws of the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, the UUA, the Article 2 bylaws are where we find our principles and purposes. They're not written on tablets, right, found on top of a mountain. They are a piece of bureaucratic development by humans talking and caucusing and long into the night. And they are required because we're a living organization, because we believe our principles are living, breathing entities. They need to be checked in on regularly, at least every 25 years. And I'm not sure about that 25 years. I was told that. I thought it was more often. But so if you hear somebody say a different number, then they're probably right, and I probably got it wrong. So it's about the right time. And in fact, the UUA has called together the Article 2 Commission to formally look through all of Article 2, which includes our principles. And it's made up of lay people, and it's made up of religious professionals, not just ministers. And it's been tasked to take on this generation's responsibility to figure out, are our principles, do they reflect who and where we are now and who and where we want to be as we sit here at the cusp of the finish of the first quarter of the 21st century. And you might remember some of this. I preached about this in the spring. The timeline for the vote on, so if we're going to change our principles, it's such a serious thing. It takes 2 affirmative votes at a General Assembly. The first one of which is not actually this year. For a while, they were talking about doing it this year. It's actually going to be in 2023. And if that gets an affirmative vote, then the final vote would be in at General Assembly 2024. So you can see that there are, I've named for you 2 larger contexts that are going on that impact basically how we understand who we are and how we live out our values. There's the Article 2 Commission, which is going to have a big influence on how we understand our principles. There's the Commission on Institutional Change, which really was an audit, an anti-racism and an anti-oppression audit of Unitarian Universalism. How are we doing and what do we need to do better? And those are both institutionally grounded. But there's the 8th Principle Project, which you can think of as grassroots and coming from the bottom up. And that's what we're going to talk about more today, some of the history and then what actually it is. So I need to make that smaller so I can read my notes. So these words are directly from Paula Cole-Jones, who I'll tell you about more, but she is the originator of the 8th Principle and the 8th Principle Project. And she wrote this out on Facebook in response to a question I put out there in that Facebook page that I told you that all of you can join to help me understand how all these things are connected. So I'm just going to read it with her permission aloud to you. She says, think of it as 3 layers. The 8th Principle is a grassroots movement started by lay leaders, which today has 117 adoptions in congregations or covenanted communities. And we do this under our congregational polity because each of us is autonomous and in relationship with each other. We are continuing this work. And then there's the Commission on Institutional Change, which was formed by the board in conjunction with the UUA presidents. And it was an official body of the association, and it completed its term and submitted its report in 2020, right? And that's the Widening the Circle of Concern. And then the third one, the Article 2 Study Commission, which is to be formed at least every 25 years according to the bylaws, and it's to review not just the principles but all of Article 2, which includes the sources, purposes, and inclusion statement. The Commission's recommendations will come before GA, so I've in 2023 and then again in 2024. And Paula Cole-Jones says all of these layers are interrelated. The eighth principle is a bottom-up process, and we are hoping for it to be included in the national principles, but that process will take much longer. So we don't know in what words or form it will be into the final national proposal, but we do know that it must be present. Okay. So here it is. Here are the actual words of the eighth principle. And Chris, I wonder if you would unmute and just read them aloud for us.
Proposed eighth principle. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote, journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions.
Thank you. So where did this come from? I've said a little bit about it, but here's Paula Cole-Jones. She was working at the UUA in the area sort of near Delaware. I think she might actually live in Delaware. And basically, she developed the idea that of the existence of two different paradigms in UU circles, the seven principles and this concept of deep multiculturalism, of beloved community. And she observed Unitarian Universalists in our natural environment and really felt over and over that we can be a good UU without ever engaging in and addressing systemic racism or other oppressions. And this is especially true for white UUs. And she felt that this was highly problematic. And so her solution was to develop the eighth principle. And she did that in partnership with this other person who's illustrated here, Bruce Pollock Johnson, who together they drafted the eighth principle in 2013, and together they refined it. Bruce is a member of a congregation in the Philadelphia area, and so his work was focused on helping his congregation get educated and to adopt it as part of initially their covenant. And then in 2017, and you can see time has passed, they formally adopted it for themselves and then took that step of saying, we did this, UUA, you should do this. So he's working in his small sphere, but Paula Cole-Jones' sphere is so much larger. And I'm not sure how many of you have engaged with Paula. I know Marie has, and Marie just speaks really highly of her. She took a anti-racism training with her. So there was that work, and even further behind that work is our Unitarian Universalism's mixed history on engaging in anti-racism. We like to tell the story that we have been on the right side of history in many directions when it comes to race in this country, but that is not the whole story, right? We had both Unitarians and Universalists on both sides of the abolition issue. We have unfortunately had some very prominent Unitarians who were proponents of eugenics, which is a racially based understanding of who should live and who should die, basically. And was part of what informed basically the policies and actions of the Nazis, and certainly in apartheid. Yes, we have done really good work as part of the civil rights movements in the 1960s and early 70s. And in the 1990s, when there was funding, we were doing some really good intentional work around individually based isms, racism, as well as beginning to attend to systemic racism. But when that funding went away, so did our attention, and so did our accountability. In the midst of that, we have seen crises that are based in racism happen. We have seen in the early 70s a form of mass exodus of a lot of African American UUs because of some of the policy based decisions that were made by the UUA and also in congregations. Paula Cole Jones and the whole movement for the eighth principle suggests that in order that whatever it is that we have right now, which is the seventh principles, it is not enough for us, particularly as a faith movement that is predominantly white, to actually live into our values and our words around anti-oppression work. And so the eighth principle emerges from that need for something else, to renew our commitment, to hold ourselves accountable, and to fulfill the potential that we have in our existing principles. And this comes about in the last 5 years, where there has been another crisis that has to do with how white supremacy culture has been expressed through hiring practices in the UUA, in the experiences of religious professionals of color, in terms of access to jobs, in terms of receiving hate mail from people within their congregation. So the eighth principle is one of the ways that we can say we have not only hold this value, but we hold the value of being held accountable and to engage in this work, not just have it be lip service. In 2018, I believe it was, Black Lives of UU Blue said, "We hope and expect Unitarian Universalism to adopt the eighth principle." That's one of the ways that we understand that Unitarian Universalism is committed to us as Black UUs, as UUs who are part and parcel of this faith movement. So the eighth principle project, which has a website, so I've referenced that there's a working networking Facebook group, but there's also the project, and I hope that you will, if you haven't gone there to educate yourself, that will be one of the things you do. It says the best way for us to truly support racial justice in a significant way is to purge ourselves and our institutions of the culture and exclusive practices of whiteness and white supremacy. And I just want to say, that doesn't say to purge ourselves of whites, right? I don't think I need to say that to those of you who are on here, but this is not about hostility towards white people. This is about this piece of that is much larger than any single one body, that it gets enacted, that is a bias towards and a placing as primary things that are associated with cultures that have been considered and termed white. A few more things that I want to make sure that you have access to, that you know about, although I find that these are terms that are dynamic, and so I'm often returning to them and learning new things as I think more about them or listen to other people talk about them. And these are terms that are a part of the language of the eighth principle, and that's why I'm raising them up to you. These words are directly from the website of the Eighth Principle Project, asking the question, well, so it says beloved community, what does that mean? And their response is, beloved community happens when people of diverse, actually, you know what? I'm not going to read this. Who's willing to unmute? The first person to unmute, will you read this for us?
I'll read it. Beloved community happens when people of diverse racial, ethnic, educational, class, gender, abilities, sexual orientation, backgrounds, identities come together in an interdependent relationship of love, mutual respect, and care that seeks to realize justice within the community and in the broader world.
Thank you. There are many ways to understand beloved community. This is one way for us, as we're going through the door of the eighth principle, to think about it. And then the word accountably is in the eighth principle, and it's a word that at the very least can generate questions, sometimes can generate reactionary responses, defensiveness. So these words are not only from the website, but they are informed by what the website says about what does accountability mean. What is it? And this is in two parts. This one answers what does accountability look like for white UUs, and then the next slide is going to have us what does accountability look like for UUs of color. So I wonder if there's another person who would read this aloud.
I'll read it.
Thank you, Marie.
Honoring, supporting, and funding the creation of caucus space for people with marginalized identities, in this case around race, ethnicity. Caucus space allows people of color to discern needs and concerns and express to the rest of the community. White people engaging and centering perspectives, people of color in collective spaces like congregational life in areas where decision-making power and influence exists, while not tokenizing any one person or any one opinion.
Thank you. So an accountability for UUs of color. Who will volunteer to read this?
I guess I could read it. Cultivating caucus space that allows people of color to discern needs and concerns and express to the rest of the community. UUs of color holding each other accountable, helping each other identify and dismantle signs of intergroup prejudice or internalized racism, advocating for effective mechanisms or structures to ensure that this similarly for other oppressions, to ensure this similarly for other oppressions.
Thank you, Kathy. I'll just say this is a lot of information to be taken in. And so this is part of our anti-racism work, right, is that we are doing things. I see that we lost Pat. We do them over and over and are humble in the face of learning new things each time we do it, that it's not repetitive. It's actually just a new angle on things. So the website of the Eighth Principle Project actually asks this question. And I think they ask it and answer it in part because this is often a question that when UU congregations are engaging this, which is why do we need to single out racism in particular? Okay. And I certainly have my own answers to why I think that is, and probably you do too, or you would develop them. But I want you to share with you what the Eighth Principle Project has to say with that. That the two worst crises in modern in the modern UUA, so this is the late 1960s and this one that happened in the past 5 years in 2017, they were both related to race. So that tells us, right, that we have a special problem, and it might be a special problem or in part because we are so identified with the United States, and the United States has a special problem with race and racism. Our nation was founded in a way that meant that humans had to be enslaved. That was how capital and the wealth of this country was built. There's no way to be able to separate that out. And so it makes sense that it would be something that we would have to address, that would be part of our past and our present. Now, you can say that about sexism and misogyny, but what we see is that sort of through the history of the Unitarian Universalism, that we have actually ended up doing well when it comes to parity around women. There are still issues that happen. Women ministers get talked, their appearance gets talked about a ton in a way that male ministers don't. Or are undercut in different ways. But in general, when we see power, we see that that actually has been affected in a positive way. We also see that there is more positive progress when it comes to being inclusive and honoring of LGBTQIA folks. These are not, and while there are still issues, right, very much so around gender identity, around folks with disabilities, around class, we come back again to this piece where we struggle with how to live into our values around full inclusion and not just wallpaper, not just lip service. I want to add just a little bit of caution that as we choose as a congregation to engage and educate around the eighth principle, the language and the text itself, and this is a note of caution that I bring having watched and heard other congregations who have done this work, is that we see that one of the sometimes endearing, sometimes super annoying habit that some UUs have of deciding that they are the arbiters of language, of correcting language. We see that coming out as one of the ways that white UUs will engage this. Oh, I'm not sure I like the way that that sounds. This is a much better way to say it. Will happen, right? It's kind of like we're getting our metaphorical red pen out and telling, frankly, a bunch of UUs of color, you did it wrong. This is what you should be saying. I am asking each and every one of you to not be that UU. And if you are in a space in this coming year, as we engage the congregation in this, is to help other Tussians not to be that UU, including shutting down, even if that might be uncomfortable, because that is a form of white supremacy culture, right? When we feel empowered to be able to change the words that a whole host of UUs of color have said, this speaks for us. So as of August 3rd, so this is after the last time I spoke to you about this, when I preached about this in June, there are 117 congregations that have adopted on their own, right? They get to do this. This is the grassroots saying, this is what we want to look like. The eighth principle, this is a way to influence the larger universe. As of January of the same year, there were only 25. So there is a movement happening. I know after I preached about this in June, one of the conversations Chris and I had said is like, I can't believe we aren't on that list. We should be on that list. And yes, we should be on this. And I hope you all are going to make it possible that we will be on that list. And I just want to give you perspective that there are about 1,000 congregations in the United States. UU congregations. So this is the leading 10%, they're there. Let's get in the next 10%. Let's do this. So I'm gonna hand this over to Chris, who's gonna kind of walk you through some of the thinking that he and I have done and about how we as a board initiative can educate and adopt the eighth principle. You are still muted, I believe.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Reverend Karen. I think to bring out the broader time frame, just up through the process of potential adoption by the congregation, we are scheduling a vote on adopting this at our October general membership meeting. But of course, there's a lot to go before that, and then there's stuff to go afterwards. Let me just, going into the broad future a little bit, adoption of the eighth principle does not stop when, presuming the congregation TUS votes yes on adopting it. It's an ongoing process of constantly checking ourselves and engaging ourselves and moving beyond that and what we can do to be true, just besides voting yes on it and then patting ourselves in the back and then moving on. So anyway, leading up to the February vote, I've decided to try to take on the leadership of this. And let me say, I bring no special life experiences or things this, probably a lack of life experiences that I realize is lacking, that I realize this is something I need to get involved in. And so we think of this in terms of concentric circles. And right now it's primarily been discussions between Reverend Karen and myself. We have a board meeting, Board of Trustees meeting on Tuesday night. And at that time, I plan to formally bring to the board my desire to take the lead on this and the rough timetable this would entail. And then hopefully a call for, first of all, a call for volunteers from the board and then to the entire congregation who will be willing to spend some time and effort to getting approval of this or bring it to the congregation for approval. And so what I hope to happen rather quickly is I will bring my plans, my interest in leading this to the board on Tuesday and hopefully get whatever support I can from them. I don't think that'll be a problem, but and start to look for other people to help volunteer to form a committee of people taking necessary action in order to get this work through the process. And I mean, one of the main things we have to do will be engaging our congregants. And that's going to entail however many meetings are necessary. Let's face it, they'll probably be on Zoom, but we'd love to have some meetings in person with people. But just some, first of all, some getting education, getting maybe written materials out to the congregation prior to any meeting so they can get background and any questions they want to get answered. And then also, leading them for a list of questions they want to bring to a meeting. So hopefully what we would do is have a number of online Zoom sessions where myself and the committee can sort of outline what our plans are, what the eighth principle entails. And then a lot of it's just going to be taking questions, and where we don't know all the answers, we'll do our best and get back to people on answers we don't have. But it's going to be a lot of, hopefully this congregation usually comes up with great questions and what's actually entailed, what's entailed in the rest of the process, what do people need to do to vote? And then also what do they need to do after, assuming we approve the eighth principle, we don't just, like I say, clap for ourselves. We decide what's going to be our ongoing process and projects to have this continue and actually be a meaningful part of our congregation's commitment. So again, just to review we're on a rather short time frame, but we can give it a lot of energy. We're talking about the February congregational meeting for a vote. It'll be done in conjunction with the yearly congregational meeting.
I'm noticing that this slide actually doesn't have the little pieces of that say what those dots mean. So, right, you can't see any words that say what this dot means or this one, right?
No.
No, I don't know why it's actually here on the next animation.
There's
Oh,
something just something showed up.
it did, didn't it?
I thought it did
So
yesterday when we went over this.
I
Okay, if you got
know.
a different slide.
So let me just verbally do it since none of you else can see what I'm seeing. Okay. So this is June 2021. So this is last June where I preached on this to the congregation. And then this is kind of right around now, which is the board educating itself on this topic. And that's some folks are really educated and others are just beginning that process. This one is today. This is this leadership workshop. And this one is also today, and it's the small groups that you're going to be doing when Chris finishes presenting, coming up with additional ideas for how to educate the congregation and what to do. This one is it's a big question mark, and it basically is saying what it is that you come up in those small groups would fit into that space. It's the heart of the work. And then this one is that based on all of that work, I'm committed to you all, us together, me doing a Sunday service in January or February that brings us to the full attention of the congregation yet again. And then there's one more, which would be the congregational vote. And as Chris said, that would be at the February congregational meeting that also includes like the budget town hall. So my apologies that the animation is not working here.
Fine.
Right. And so that's that whole question of like what you're going to do. So my apologies, Chris. Please
No, that's fine. Okay.
continue.
Um, so I guess near term, what'll I be doing to help? Is I think it's really up to me to take the initiative to get this moving. What will I be doing near term? I've been educating myself. I'm going to be sending some stuff out to the board, which will be available to other members of the congregation. Just a little background and a copy of the eighth principle and what it entails and what issues might be brought up by that. What am I gonna need is volunteers. Any help would be gladly appreciated. I don't bring a lot of especially pertaining life experience to this. I want to correct that. And I want to, so there's a lot of people in this congregation I know I could learn from and could be a big help to me in bringing this to the congregation, working on the committee, and hopefully not only seeing this through February, but seeing this beyond February. What do we need to do to make this commitment mean something? So the next step in the next few is Tuesday night, I'll be bringing this to the board for just to lay out my plans and hopefully gain their approval and sanction and any support I need on doing this.
And I imagine that part of that presentation to the board, Chris, will include the outcome of the small groups that we're just about to do, which is
Yes.
ideas for how to use our different structures, our committee structures. If you think about that concentric circle, first slide, right, which is how can we grow the capacity, maybe at the committee level, and then next at congregationally, do we hold those meetings that Chris was saying, and then I know that the council asked each committee to look at their very old charter and make new ones. Do we ask that there's a process in creating a new charter to integrate eighth principle values into that? There are many different ways. And so right now we're going to have you all go into small groups to talk about, really blue sky it. Even if you're like, I don't know, that would never work with us, go ahead and put it on a list. So you're going to introduce yourselves to each other. You're going to pick a scribe and come up with ways that you personally maybe you're involved with. Maybe it's the anti-racism book group that has a life of its own and keeps going. Maybe it's something that you aren't connected with, that you're like, what about the music committee? Oh, right, the music committee doesn't work, but what about the blah blah blah? Like, could they do something? A big piece of some of this work, frankly, is how I choose the sources for what is part of worship. I pay attention. How many voices are there? Are we representing voices of color? And trying to stay away from tokenizing, but also integration. So, small groups, I'm going to have you go into these small groups. You're going to spend about between 12 and 14 minutes. I'm not quite sure. Again, pick a scribe and somebody who will report out to the larger group when we come back together. Welcome back. Welcome back. I think you might all be back. Yes, one more. There we are. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing the screen, but it's now time for a report out from the small groups. So what I'd love to do is similar to what we did this morning, which is that there's a verbal report out, but also if you can write key pieces into the chat so that we can have that save the chat and we have notes to go from. So which scribe reporter would like to report out first, sharing with us who was in your group?
I can go. So it was me, Marie, Carol, Kathy, and Bob. Am I missing anyone? I think that was it. And looking at the notes, I think an interesting point that Marie brought to our attention is that, yes, we can attend workshops, services, share materials, but when it comes down to it, a lot of people need to educate themselves on their own with support, but that it should be each congregant's individual responsibility. And she also, Marie also felt that she believes that the eighth principle would be unanimously adopted or unanimously voted to be adopted. But the real challenge is continuing to live out that commitment so that there's always a safe space to do this kind of work of dismantling prejudices. And so, sorry, I'm just reading through the notes. You know, also Kathy brought up that Sunday services could be a main avenue for educating the larger community. It's been really nice that there's been African-American music incorporated into services as a huge positive change. Also readings, and that likely makes people feel more welcome. So there was generally a discussion of, yes, a lot of work has been going on, but maybe it should be more explicit in the services, and understanding, of course, there have been some sermons devoted to the topic, but we were all just kind of curious how much people would engage in the Sunday service itself, and maybe that would make it easier. And I think that's about it. Please, anyone else in my group, let me know if I missed something.
I'm not hearing anyone filling in any gaps. I'm taking that means that you covered it all. Lauren, thank you. The other group. Who's reporting from the other group?
Chris.
Sorry. Several good points brought up in our group. First was to make sure to incorporate the Social Justice Committee.
Chris,
So
before you go further, can you tell us who was in your group?
Oh, I'm sorry, Edie, Marlene, and Angela. Okay. Yeah, our first was incorporate the Social Justice Committee, because there'll be a strong ally and probably some good suggestions on this. The second one, which is strongly emphasized, was this is really an ongoing process. It doesn't end in February. There's need for ongoing education and ongoing work on this. So it's great if we can pass it in February, but the effort does not stop there. It's a continuous process. process. Also, it was pointed out that it's not the job of Black people to educate white people here. We have to all be involved in educating ourselves and each other. And then the other one, we mentioned some of the our other resources we have available, the Anti-Racism Book Club, and just other congregations, people in the area close by are working on the same problem. And one group has actually got, I dropped the famous woman who's running everything, who's
Paula Cole Jones.
Paula Cole Jones is going to be working as this group, so maybe we can tie into them somehow or something like that. So she's coming by to speak or something, I believe. So anyway, that was, if anybody else in my group wants to correct anything I said, please jump in.
Can I ask a point of clarification? You said there's another congregation that is working with
I thought someone at the end, it was the clock was ticking, but someone else was maybe someone else in our group jump in on that.
Yeah, I was sharing that the organization that I do anti-racism training with an organization, and I also do some marketing and outreach with them. So I was, through that connection, I spoke with a board member of the UU in Summit, Beacon UU, who contacted us interested in one of the workshops that we do called Transforming White Organizational Culture. And so I had a couple of conversations with her. She took it back to her board, and she got back to me yesterday, letting me know that they decided that they're going to have Paula Cole Jones come in and do some work with them.
Thank you for that clarification, Edie. Appreciate
Yep.
it. Okay, so what I hear from the two groups, the first group identified a similar thing that I think is one side of what the other group is, which is that we can make this vote happen, and there's confidence that it would pass, but that the work can't end with the vote. That is just a means to do the work. It is not the end goal. That the first group said there might be things that we can do as a congregation, but ultimately it's the individual is responsible for educating themselves. And there was a suggestion that perhaps Sunday services could address this more, which I find interesting. The second group said, well, what role does the Social Justice Committee have in being a venue, a way to help make this happen this year? It was stated, right, that, what I heard is a little bit different than what was stated, which is white people need to educate white people, right? That this cannot become the responsibility of the members of color that we have in the congregation. That we do have as a resource the Anti-Racism Book Club, and it would be interesting to engage them in the same way that we might engage the Social Justice Committee. And then it was noted that there are other congregations, congregations who are doing this work. Is there a connection that can be gained from connecting with them, right? So again, polity, we are our own, we're autonomous, but we're in relationship, we're in association with other UU congregations. So thank you. I see folks have put their notes into the chat. So I wonder, now that here we are having shared this information, and I know Edie, you had said you had a comment, so you wanted to add it. Maybe let's have you add your comment now if you think it's the right time, but then also let's have a conversation about what is sparking for you around this. So Edie.
So my comment was that there was one little piece that I heard when you were presenting about the eighth principle. And I think it was something quoted from that document, not particularly something that you were purporting. And it was the piece about accountability for white people. And I don't remember the exact wording, but the point of it was to center people of color. And I have difficulty with that. The organization that I do training with are very much adopt and believe in what they believe, which is decentering whiteness and centering multiracial community. And so to me, to decenter whiteness and then to center people of color is just doing the opposite of what was done to us. And so I very much hope that our congregation will adopt the eighth principle, but I would not want to see us replace it, us replace centering whiteness with centering folks of color. That's all. You know, it's like the fear that people have, that some white folks have, that if you teach the truth about the United States history, that then white people are going to be put in the position that Black people were put in. I just needed to say that, that's all. And I think it's a matter of how the congregation goes forward.
I think it's a powerful and important distinction. So I'm thankful for you to raise it, because it's not just a change in language. Actually, it's a shift in imagining beloved community, and it certainly resonates with the eighth principle, which names beloved community. So thank you for that shift. Simple and complicated. Wonderful.
Well,
There's no just in that one. That was a good thing. Please, thank you. Other folks want to say, yeah, Carol, I see your hand.
I'm not sure if our group said the service committee, Sunday service committee should be doing more, but I'm not sure that that's what we said. Was rather that is, Sunday service is a natural time to provide, information, share information about the eighth principle. And you said you're going to be doing that in January, or before the vote, right? And that's something you've also presented in June, was it? You talked about this, right? So I'm not sure if the message was, oh, Sunday service should be doing more, but just that is a natural time where I think our congregation will be apt to hear. It's an easier, I think it's more, the congregation will be reached in Sunday services. I think that's what we were saying.
And I hear, and I think for me, part of what I hear there, though, and is I am wondering, I think the board watched a video at the last meeting that was talking about kind of seeing what our pandemic times are as a form of collective trauma. And one of the things that Reverend Sunshine said at that moment was like, usually you have to say something 7 times and 7 different ways for people to begin to hear it. Mm-hmm. And I know that for myself. Like, frankly, you all should definitely tell me something twice, because I often miss it the first time. And it's not just 7 times in the same way. It is 7 times in 7 different ways. Mm-hmm. And so I hear this piece of like, well, that's where the most people are and it's the most engagement. And I just want to encourage us. And is that this is our time to think of the 6 other ways and to take responsibility for the 6 other ways. So that even if it only meets a small facet of the congregation, if there are more of them, then because some people, frankly, some of our congregation do not come to Sunday services, and that's more and more true the longer we go on Zoom. So how do we engage relationally? Because we do Zoom as relationally as we can, frankly. I think on the continuum out there, we're way more relational than like the pre-recorded thing. But there's a limit, right? So what are those other ways in maybe already existing settings, right? So you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we do have to find somebody who's doing the anti-racist book group, or who's on the social justice committee. Sherry said she was going to be here, but she's not. Or I don't even know, like holds a dinner, right? So that it can be outside in your backyard and you have a conversation about this. So, Sunday services, my stuff can be more explicit, but really this is an opportunity for this to come from many places.
Good point. Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Was that your hand, Edie? Yeah.
It was. And am I unmuted? Yes, I'm unmuted.
Yeah.
So this is something I actually mentioned in the small group that I shared, and I'll share here. That as I was listening to the presentation today, something came to mind, which was some months back during Sunday services online, you had I think for 2 or 3 weeks, I don't remember exactly, you may have had a Black Lives Matter sign or something draped behind you, and then it was gone. And I remember at one point thinking, all right, so the issue hasn't gone away. The media isn't promoting it as much, talking about it as much, but so one thought is a way it can be incorporated into Sunday services would be to have that up every week. I mean, I don't know how much space you have on your wall, but that'd be a permanent piece because that's a permanent issue and a sign of TUS's awareness.
And commitment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love that idea, and now it's making me think. So what led to me removing it, right? Which would have been like a kind of probably innocuous thing, but has this consequence. And I'm going to challenge us again. Here we have centered me as your vehicle for this message. So how can we do that same thing and expand it? Like, can you, when you hold committee meetings, can you change your virtual background? Can you put a sign on your couch? Right? Like, I just want to, yes, and.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry.
And so that makes me think so another group I'm involved with, in the intro, they always do a land acknowledgement. And so could we, or one of the ideas is when we have any kind of committee meeting, for people not just to do a land acknowledgement, to maybe also do an acknowledgement of the 8th principle and our commitment to it as a reminder of our work.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, so these are great ideas, right? That maybe somebody could be writing. Edie, are you typing in? You can put some of your ideas in.
Who's you?
Edie, since you said them, maybe if you are
Oh,
within, if you are within typing distance, and if not, you could ask somebody else here to write them.
if somebody else doesn't mind, I'm on my phone on here.
Right.
If
Who
somebody
wants to
could
type on
please do it.
phones? Definitely not my generation. Not me. Gen X.
I can, but I'm extremely slow. The meeting will be over by the time I got the first one in.
I'll type it in. I'll type it in.
Thank you. Thank you.
I had a question.
Yeah.
So I'm fully in support of adopting the eighth principle. It had me rereading the other 7 in ways I have not before, and almost second guessing the meaning of one in particular, the second principle, which is justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. And I think maybe subconsciously, if not consciously, I always interpreted that as including anti-racism. And I fully understand why we were breaking it out. Like, I really loved that part of like, why are we singling it out? I get, but like, could you, Reverend Karen, remind us of what we're supposed to be interpreting from the second principle?
I think you are not alone in, because some of the pushback against the adoption of the eighth principle is it's already covered in all the other 7. And many people will point to number 2 and say, and especially that one. So I think it's fair to say, to read that and say, well, equity in human relations, isn't that what anti-racism ultimately
Justice
means
in
to?
particular, yeah.
Or justice, right? Maybe less so compassion, but maybe not. So I think what I understand is the response is, yeah, and we've had it for a long time, and we continue to have this particular burden. I was just so not this Sunday, but next Sunday, I'm preaching on Not God, on atheism, and I've been reading this book. By this African American humanist who, at one point, as he's leaving a deep Christianity, he looks over at Unitarian Universalism because he went to Harvard Divinity School, where a lot of us are, a lot of UUs are, and he calls it thin, and they have a problem with race. I was like, ouch. And this is somebody we are in positive relationship with, right? We, as a denomination, we seek him out. He's a really powerful writer and speaker. But
that's recent.
This memoir
assessment.
It wasn't written in the last 5 years, but yeah, I mean, even if it was written in the past 5 years, I think most of the Black authors, people I listen to, are like, okay, let's keep doing the work. Good things are happening, and just got to go on for a long time for us to really believe that this is uprooted.
Who was I'm sorry, I just flipped over to check the second principle and then got into the 7th principle. Who were you referencing? You said thin, but
Anthony Pinn, Pinn.
Oh, I haven't heard of him.
If you come on October 3rd, you will. So I think it is actually, if we were to have listening circles, this is one of the questions to be prepared for, right? To self-educate as leaders. If you're going to sign on and be part of the initiative that says, yes, we want to spread it out in those concentric circles and get more and more people to at least know something about it and maybe even agree, right? They don't, is that this is one of the questions. Well, isn't the 7 principles enough? And frankly, I won't say every UU of color, because UUs of color are not monolithic. The ones that I am listening to are like, this is a good thing to do. And some say it's an essential thing to do, but not enough, not sufficient. Essential, but not sufficient. And to me, one of the ways that I enact my anti-racism is, and I'm really challenged by what you said, Edie. I want to center that beloved community, multicultural community, but that often means giving more weight to the opinions, not of every person of color, because there are certainly there's one running for governor in this state who's, was there on January 6th, right? He doesn't have a lot of weight that I give him, or not governor, against Bonnie Watson Coleman. But I will give more weight when a person of color tells me something is racist. That's one of my obligations as a white anti-racist. Not to give away my discernment, but to give more weight to that. So that's part of my response, Lauren. I hope that kind of helps.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. I appreciate it. And in no way, I started out my comment with this, but in no way am I saying I'm not supporting adding the 8th. It just had me wondering about the meaning of the others all over again.
and isn't that beautiful, right? That this conversation actually might connect us more to our principles. And frankly, what's going on in the wider universe of Unitarian Universalism is that they are being relooked at. And you might remember from my sermon, or maybe you know this from your own history, there used to be 6. Sometimes people will go, but the 7, they're the 7. And you're like, yeah, but they used to be the 6. And probably the people then were like, we don't need a 7th, but we frankly did. Can you imagine Unitarian Universalism without the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part? I'd be out of here. I'd be out of here. We are incomplete with it. And frankly, we're incomplete without the 8th, in my opinion. Right? But let's let's hopefully have conversations. Yeah. I'm aware that time is moving. We said we would end at 1:30. So are there questions you have to at least ask, even if they don't get answered, so that they're in this circle before we move to a closing and a connecting with Chris? And Marie has said Principle 2 doesn't speak to dismantling racist systems, right? Which is kind of an interesting, you have to take some things away in order for, right, justice to happen.
So I have one more, and it definitely will not get answered here and in this time. But I also, my understanding when you were presenting about the 8th principle, again, I don't remember exactly how it was worded, but I got that it talked about becoming multiracial and perhaps more inclusive. And it seems that's going to be a huge challenge.
You mean as a congregation aspiring that our membership is reflected in increasingly more multicultural, multiracial?
That was my interpretation of it. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's not correct.
I will just respond a little bit with some history to that folks can chew on. So there's a long period of time in the 90s and the early 2000s where I think a lot of good intentioned white people were like, if we just become more multicultural, multiracial, if we change the faces in the pews, that will indicate that we have reached beloved community. And the feedback is no, that is not one necessarily indicative of a truly welcoming space. Right. For I think that piece, the meditation piece from Shannon Lang, kind of talked about, if you don't, there are people of color who fit within Unitarian Universalism, but there are plenty of people who don't feel like it's home, right? And so there's that. Mm-hmm. The other thing I think is we can think about being a multicultural, a welcoming multicultural qualities, and they don't all have to be about membership. I think sometimes we can focus too much on membership, and it leads us, I'm not being as articulate as I want, but it leads us in ways that we aren't actually dismantling problematic systems. But let's keep that question going, because I heard for the first time in that Paula Cole Jones response from Facebook that I read to you that she acknowledged that the current wording may not be the wording that gets adopted nationally. And I hear from that there's a lot of give and take. I still hope that we will not have the conversation about it would sound better if we cross this T and dot that I. I really think that that's a defense mechanism by people who do not want to give up their power.
Yeah.
But I hear that when there's support for it and it's taken seriously, it may look differently than it does. But that's, I think, a different thing. Chris, I bet that you would love to know who's willing to join you and help you.
Yes, I sure would. If not immediately, in the very near future, please send me your indications. If you don't want to tell me today, I really need your help, not just for the work, but also to broaden my horizons and perspective, because I sometimes doubt my ability to be the right person to lead this. I'm going to give it my best, but I could really use some input from other people to sort of check my inherent problems in terms of leading things. So please, if you want to volunteer today or shortly, I'm going to start moving. February is going to come up quickly, and I want to do a good, thorough job on this. So please let me know very soon, because I'm going to be talking to the board Tuesday night and looking to broaden out very quickly after that. So thanks in advance for any help anybody's willing to give me.
I wonder too if anybody who's connected with Sherry, who's the chair of the newly emerging Social Justice Committee, might be willing, who I think that there is a date for that committee to meet, would be willing to ask for time at that meeting to talk about this. I had a small conversation with her about it, but is there anyone here who's aware of that, attending that?
I really haven't got a chance to meet her yet. I'd like the opportunity to do so. Maybe I can take that on. I can contact Sherry and see if I can show up at the next meeting.
So I saw both Edie and Marie's hands going up for going to that meeting. So just FYI. And then I see on the chat that Marie and Angela have said, Chris, they're part of your cadre of people to help make this happen.
Oh, great. Very good. Great to hear that. Thank you. Yes, Marie. Unmute.
Sometimes the space bar thing doesn't work. So I have been in communication with Sherry, and I did inform her about the board, really wanting to, kind of center the eighth principle as one of our important missions for the congregational year, and she seemed on board with that. So I think, and I remember when Edie, Pat, Sherry, and I got together, we had that meeting around the MLK at TUS. We had also kind of talked about eighth principle stuff there. So, I definitely will bring that up to Sherry again when she puts together an agenda for the meeting.
Okay.
I see that Carol has added her name to your cadre, Chris.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And for those
What a
folks
team.
who are going to the Social Justice Committee meeting, I hope you encourage Sherry to get the word out in the next Wednesday, and frankly, so that way it can also be on the Sunday announcements next week. It's too late for this week. So because there are probably other people who want to attend who aren't in that small group who's talking to each other.
Great. Okay.
It is 1:32, friends, and I want you to be able to go. Marlene's like, yeah, I'm still here, but I need to go. So thank you so much for your time and for your love and your commitment to this very essential piece of what it is to be a Unitarian Universalist right now, and frankly, all the time. But this is us. This is our chance. So hope to see you tomorrow. I'll be recrafting Eve, and I think it's going to be a good service, a challenging one for all of us.
Thank you, Reverend
Thank
Karen, and
you.
thanks everybody for showing up.
Thank you, Chris
Appreciate it.
and Karen. Good
All right.
workshop.
Thank
Get out in the
you.
nice, everybody out in the nice weather.
I don't know if anyone can hear me.
What are you
What?
saying, Lauren?
Save the chat.
Oh, yeah,
Save the chat. Thank you. I needed that. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.